Thank you so very much, Danielle. And if we can go to the next slide, please. Just before we deep dive into the topic that we're all here for, I just want to give you a very, very short intro as to who we are, what we do, and why we're all here. So we are Greenheart. I'm Lucy. We are a full-service social and environmental impact consultancy, or sustainability consultancy in short. We were founded in 2015 and a B Corp certified company ourselves since 2017. We work with a wide range of businesses across industries, from renewable energy company to FMCG, cosmetics, food and beverage, professional services, and many more. We offer services across the full spectrum of impact, from helping companies set robust sustainability strategies, often backed by materiality assessments, all the way down to compliance and reporting. With a lot of measuring, monitoring, and improving their environmental impacts in between. And one of our core service lines, which we are possibly the most known for, is actually helping companies all along their B Corp certification journey. So you will have a little nugget of the B Corp team present here today. So you'll have my colleague Daisy deep diving into what the new standards actually entails, Molly wonderfully moderating the chat and the Q&A, and I will be doing a bit of faffing before and after, giving you a bit of intro. But so let's dive in. What will we cover today? So the agenda will first give a little bit of context as to why are the standards actually changing? What are we talking about when we're talking about the evolution of the standards? What happened so far and where we are currently on this process. Then Daisy will deep dive into what the new standards actually entail and give a bit more context about the structure and the content of the new standards. Then we'll dare venture and share some of our thoughts and reflections as Greenheart on what we think of these new standards. And most importantly, hope to give you a little bit of like practical advice and guidance as to how to start preparing for this transition. As Danielle mentioned, we aim to have generous time for Q&A at the end. So please don't refrain yourself from asking questions in the Q&A box. So first things first, why are we even here? What are we talking about when we mention the evolution of the standards? So the B Corp standards are really at the core of B Corp certification and the B Corp movement. So the B Corp being a company level certification, the standards are what a company is assessed against to become B Corp certified. The B Corp standards have been reviewed already several times since the inception of the movement and the certification in 2007. As a matter of fact, they are currently in their 6th version that was published in 2019. They have been reviewed every 3 years or so. And as you might know, continuous improvement is really a core value of the B Corp movement. And so currently the standards are being reviewed to publish what we would call like the 7th version or version 7 of the standards. You will note that it's been indeed more than 3 years since 2019. And so since the last version of the standards, the reason why this evolution is taking significantly more time is because the world has significantly changed since the inception of the B Corp certification, and so have the level of expectations of stakeholders on what it means to be a business as a force for good and what it means to be a business with high standards of environmental and social performance. So B Lab has announced the process for reviewing the current version of the standards in 2020, has conducted some focus group across 2021, and has published a first draft already at the end of 2022 for a first round of public consultation, has digested all of these public feedback throughout the year 2023, and has published at the beginning of this year, in January 2024, a much more detailed version of the draft standards that are available on an online website for public consultation that ran this year between mid-Jan to mid-March. I know that there's a few of our clients, so you might remember, and some of you I know have participated in some of our consultation cafes that we've organized earlier this year to really try and encourage as many companies as possible to provide feedback to B Lab. So all of this feedback has been also analyzed, and B Lab has published in September of this year a summary report of all of the feedback that was provided, and like that was mainly positive and affirming the direction and the broad structure of the standards, but also resulting in a couple changes in the whole kind of like structure and some themes and inclusions or not in the standards. Which means that today we are actually in a position where we have really good information as to the overall structure of the standards. Of course, they're still being finalized, so the granular details is not set in stone. However, we have a good enough understanding of what the B Corp standards will look like for basically assessing where you stand against it and help prepare. The current communication of B Lab is that the new standards will be released early 2025, which we all know could mean, many different things. So we're really hoping that they will be released in Q1. What is very clear is that it will not be affecting companies that aim to submit in 2025, and will start affecting companies with a submission date from 2026. We will deep dive a lot more into the granular of the details on the kind of like submission dates, etc., towards the end and in the Q&A. So don't worry, this is not the only piece of information. But so this is a little bit where we are. And so now with this in mind and kind of like the view on what the standards were and what the outcome, so what the first draft was and the outcomes of the public consultation, we have quite a good understanding of what the standards will look like. And I will therefore pass on to my colleague Daisy to tell you a bit more about that.
Thanks, Lucy. So in the next section, we'll run through some high-level information about the structure of the new standards. So this information has all come from the B Lab microsite of the latest version of the standards, and also from our digestion of the second consultation. There was like a large presentation that they released with all of that information in. So effectively, we've read it all, consolidated it, and we're giving you kind of the high-level updates here in this presentation. So we won't be going into super low level detail of kind of the sub requirements, but if you do have like more detailed questions, we're more than happy to support you with those after the session via email, etc. So the headlines are effectively that eligibility will be checked through the foundation requirements. So this is a really welcome change, because previously the eligibility process was a little bit of a grey area and there was kind of some unclear requirements with the previous version of the standards and the review process. So we're really pleased to see the eligibility requirements being brought kind of front and centre, one of the first parts of the new standards that will be assessed for companies, and they're super clear as well. And the legal requirement is also going to be in these foundation requirements, which is the first part of the new standards. So previously, where we saw version 6, sorry, had the 3 pillars. So we saw version 6 as really being made up of 3 component parts. So eligibility, the legal requirement, and then the performance and getting 80 points on the BIA. Those 3 pillars are all being consolidated down into these 2 big sections of the new standards. So firstly, the foundation requirements, which will encompass those eligibility requirements and the legal requirement that we previously saw. And then the 80 points on the BIA being transformed into these mandatory performance requirements. And a big change is that we're moving from having 5 impact areas in the current version of the B impact assessment towards having 7 impact topics in the mandatory performance requirements, which we'll deep dive into in a couple of slides' time. And a major shift in this performance measurement is that we're moving away from a points-based system. So the current BIA is a flexible approach where you can score points across all of the 5 B impact assessment areas, and you can get different number of points in each section depending on where your business excels, what focus your business has, etc. Whereas the new version of the performance requirements, there's no scoring. You have to meet mandatory requirements across each of the 7 topics. So we'll move and talk about kind of the performance recognition later on as well, and how that scoring methodology is being replaced by a different way of measuring performance against those 7 topics. So just to mention again, I would say the two key changes here are the fact that we're moving from 5 impact areas to 7 impact topics, and that the points system is being removed, and there won't be any scoring in the new version in terms of a set number of points. So looking ahead into the foundation requirements. So we've got a nice picture of some fungi here because we like to connect with nature at Greenheart, and fungi are the foundation of ecosystems and they're critical for supporting life on Earth. So we really see these foundation requirements as that kind of fungi and foundation of these new requirements. And they're really clear and really well laid out as well. So as I mentioned before, the eligibility requirements are now part of these initial foundation requirements. So this includes some eligibility requirements that we're already familiar with, like the business has to be in operations for at least 12 months in order to be eligible for B Corp. There'll be the scoping of the legal structure, so making sure you have the legal entities that are eligible for B Corp, such as being a limited company or being an LLP, as opposed to being a charity, which is not eligible. There'll also be a review of involvement in high-risk industries, which are not eligible to proceed. So, for example, gambling, tobacco, the fossil fuel industry. And there's also the commitment to accurate representation so that you'll fill out the assessment in a truthful way. And the commitment to transparency are all in those eligibility requirements. So the second part of the foundation requirements is the legal requirement, which is what we're already familiar with, currently tested in the mission lock section of the governance pillar of the current BIA. And this is the commitment to amend your governing documents, your articles of association, for example, with the BLAB approved wording, to make sure that you're committing to stakeholder governance within the foundation of your business and those governing documents. And the second part of the legal requirement is also something we're already familiar with, which is signing the Declaration of Interdependence, which is currently done in kind of the final stages of the review process, which means that B Corps are all committing to the same kind of shared goal and mission of contributing towards BLAB's theory of change. The third part is a risk assessment, and BLAB have released a little bit more information about, for example, serving clients in controversial industries recently, which we're not going to get into that detail today, but we're pleased to see those kind of developments in their risk review process are developing and becoming a bit more sophisticated. So, for example, this will look into whether you have associated operations with clients in controversial industries, but also any practices within your business that could be seen as high risk. So some of the previous disclosure questionnaire will be covered here. So, for example, we're expecting to see things like if you've had product recalls or a significant number of layoffs. These are the types of issues that would be reviewed in the risk assessment part of the foundation requirements. And the fourth element of the foundation requirements is the impact business model assessment. So these impact business models we're already familiar with from the previous version of the B Corp standards. So, for example, something like the resource conservation impact business model in the environment section, where you're rewarded for certain specific practices that you are specifically designed to deliver as part of your business model. So these are not compulsory. So we know that every B Corp doesn't have to have an impact business model. That's the current situation. And they're not compulsory going forward either, but it is compulsory to fill out the assessment. And the benefit of filling out the assessment is that if you are eligible for an impact business model, there could be benefits in the performance requirements section. So we'll go through it later, but there's some equivalency, they call it. So if you have a certain impact business model, it means you're already meeting some of the mandatory requirements. And also there's some benefits in terms of you might need to meet less mandatory requirements if you have certain impact business models. So that's a mandatory assessment, but not mandatory to actually have an impact business model. So now we'll move on to the second main pillar of the new standards, which are the performance requirements. So there's 7 performance requirements, impact topics that have been confirmed now. This number has kind of fluctuated throughout the development of the new standards. I think at one point we were on 10. So these have really been refined down through the public consultation phase and period. And some examples of how these have changed straight up is, for example, the fair work is 1 topic now, whereas previously that was 2 topics in the last version of the draft standard. So workplace culture and fair wages have been merged into 1 fair work topic. And also the complementary impact topic, which was a standalone topic, has been removed now, and some of those particular requirements have been redistributed across the other impact topics. So I'll just run through a brief description of the 7 topics that are remaining. So the first one is purpose and stakeholder governance. So this is inextricably linked to demonstrating your implementation of the legal requirement. So making sure that companies are considering their stakeholders in their decision making, how they respond to grievances, what they're doing in terms of being transparent on social and environmental impacts. So for example, public disclosures, or how you report to the board, how you report internally on your social and environmental impacts. And also one of the complementary impact topic requirements has been moved into this section following the second consultation. So previously there was a complementary impact topic on a material progress rule. So basically showing that you are making, progress towards your goals. So an example of this would be publicly disclosing some of your environmental and social goals, and then showing year on year, for example, in an impact report or in your annual report, how you're progressing against those goals to show that you are making material progress. So the second impact topic is fair work. So as I mentioned previously, the workplace culture piece and the fair wages have now been merged. So the fair work topic will include requirements such as demonstrating that you have a positive workplace culture and that you have wage equity among workers. So for example, you've done some analysis on your pay and making sure that there is equity between people doing the same job. The third pillar is JEDI. So this is justice, equity, diversity and inclusion, which has different names in different organizations. But these requirements will really make sure that each B Corp is demonstrating that they are running inclusive and diverse workplaces, and also that they're contributing to inclusivity and diversity in their community as well. So the fourth one is human rights. So there's a focus on the supply chain here and making sure that B Corps treat people with dignity and respect their human rights. And a key part of this is showing that you have due diligence procedures in place, and also remediation procedures if you do find a breach of human rights, for example, in the supply chain. And the way that B Corp is talking about this is that they want human rights to become second nature. So it becomes like how we currently manage food safety or financial due diligence in our companies, and that respecting human rights and having due diligence procedures in place should become mainstream expectations of companies, that this is just a given that is happening in the value chain as well as in your own organization. Whereas at the moment, I think sometimes it can be taken for granted slightly. So the next topic is climate action, and the next 2, climate action and environmental stewardship, are very similar themes to what we currently see in the environment section of the B impact assessment. So they've been split out to just provide a bit more space for additional sub requirements. So the climate action topic, you'll have to show that you're taking action aligned with science. So for example, aligning to a 1.5 degree trajectory, setting targets for your GHG emissions, making sure you're doing all your GHG emission reporting accurately, and that you have a plan of how to reduce your carbon. So that's really positive that that's being called out specifically as well. The next environmental topic is environmental stewardship, and this is showing that B Corps are contributing to a circular economy in their operations and their value chain. So, for example, making sure that they have a full awareness of their environmental impacts and also a strategy to address those impacts. So, for example, the new standards don't specifically call out having an environmental management system, but that would be one strategy to implement in order to make sure you're aware of your impacts and have a strategy to address each of them. And also within this section, we're also focusing on working with suppliers, on helping suppliers to identify their impacts and encourage them, provide resources, provide training to suppliers to address their environmental impacts also. So it's looking down the value chain outside of just the boundaries of your own operations. And the final 7th impact topic is government affairs and collective action. So there's some parts of this which previously would have been seen in the, actually spread across the previous version of the assessment, but for example, from the governance section and a bit from the community section. So for example, what's the approach to tax, making sure that there's no kind of tax evasion going on within the business, or you don't have kind of preferential tax structures set up. Because obviously it's really important that all businesses pay tax to support the society that we want to kind of create and live in. So making sure businesses are kind of, contributing to the society as they should be and not avoiding that. And another element of this would be responsible lobbying. So making sure you're engaging in lobbying in a positive way and not kind of having adverse effects that would go against B Lab's mission or B Corp values. So that's kind of the overview of each of those 7 topics that have been confirmed. So if you can imagine, the fair work one becomes one image and the complementary impact topic goes away, then effectively we have 1 foundation requirements pillar and then 7 impact topics. That's kind of the full picture as we see and as we expect the new standards to look like. So just going into a couple of the tailoring kind of mechanisms that have been put in place. So there are ways that the standards are going to accommodate for different types of businesses. So for example, different size businesses, different sectors. So the first example of this is that there's different size pathways, and these are different to the current size pathways that we see in the current standards. So it can be either based on the full-time equivalent number of workers that you have or the revenue, whichever one is higher. So even if you're a small business, if you have a high revenue, then you'll be pushed up into the medium category, for example. And then the sub-requirements against each of those impact topics I just went through are tailored depending on the company. So for example, a small company would be expected to implement less JEDI actions than a large company who have more resources and more staff, etc. The second tailoring is the fact that the requirements allow optionality. So for example, with JEDI, there's a list of, I think it's 26 potential JEDI actions. And depending on your size category, so a small company would have to implement 2 JEDI actions, whereas a large company would have to implement 7, for example. So depending on the size of the company, you have to implement that different number, but also you have choice across the 20, 23, 26, something like that, JEDI actions of what is most suitable to your company and what will have the biggest impact. So there's the choice element of certain optional requirements so that you can tailor it to your business. And the last flexibility piece is around the equity mechanism. So as we saw in the previous version of the standards, where there were different tracks for different companies based in different locations. So we had the developed track for those in developed markets and the developing or emerging markets track, sorry. So this time they're implementing different rules based on countries with more operational barriers. So here's just a screenshot with a few examples of the types of countries that B Lab have categorized to have more operational barriers. And there's a whole methodology about how they've categorized these countries on the full microsite displaying the standards. So, for example, the equity mechanism will allow countries with operational barriers to justify a certain percentage of non-compliance against the sub-requirements. So effectively, they'll have, for example, 5% of the sub-requirements that they won't have to meet because they have those additional barriers to meeting certain requirements. And now we're going to move on to talking about the performance recognition. So as I mentioned earlier, there's no scoring in the new standards, there's no points. So instead, each company will be rated against the sub-requirements according to these 3 categories of performance. So either does not meet, meets, and therefore passes the requirement, or exceeds, which means you're going above and beyond the requirement. So the goal would be to at least meet every one of the sub-requirements that you're required to meet, depending on if you have kind of the optionality or exemption due to the equity mechanism, for example. So aiming to meet all of the sub-requirements in order to pass and become a B Corp. And obviously, if you can exceed any of those sub-requirements, then that's absolutely amazing. And we'd encourage you to continue towards that trajectory of continuous improvement and eventually exceeding on lots of them, hopefully. So this is an example of where, you know, you can see the meets and exceeds ratings against each of the sub-requirements in this medium-sized companies human rights list of requirements, for example. And in terms of recognition of the impact business models, there's definitely some more space for this to change next year, because B Lab have said in the recent consultation that more engagement is needed on the impact business model development. So they're planning to do additional engagement with B Corps and the community and, you know, everyone that's interested, the public, in 2025. So the impact business models process is not set in stone at the moment, but as far as we're aware from the current information that's available, the impact business model performance will be rated as kind of a bronze, silver, gold, or kind of you'll have an advanced rating if you're doing really well against an impact business model. There'll be some kind of staggering of the recognition of impact business models as well, but of course they're not mandatory. It's just giving an extra gold star if you have an impact business model and showing to what level you're meeting that impact business model's requirements or going above and beyond. And this just allows additional recognition for those companies that do have impact business models like inherent to their business. B Lab have said that the companies with impact business models are key in the transition to the new economy. So because having those inherently specific positive actions and business models set up as the core of your business's purpose really is like part of this transition to an equitable and inclusive economy. So that's why they're maintaining the impact business models in the assessment, but they're not required for every single business that wants to join the B Corp movement. So I'll hand back to Lucy for some more reflections on how we're feeling about these new standards.
Thank you, Daisy. So obviously we're very excited. The main change, because everyone is kind of like asking, what is the main change that these new standards will bring about? So the main change is that we are saying goodbye to the score system. So sorry for the companies that were thriving to exceed 100 or beyond in their next cycle. Please continue implementing improvement, but really we're actually welcoming quite warmly the change to a minimum set of requirements for all companies, because we believe it will bring like a level of clarity, especially to the general public, not only to the B Corp community, as to what it means to be a B Corp, and that all B Corps do fulfill a minimum kind of like standards across social and environmental impact. We acknowledge that it will be difficult for some companies. So in the current system, a company could be scoring extremely well in one area and doing almost nothing yet in one area, which potentially was also had some benefits, as it was kind of like, let's embark on a B Corp journey, reap the reward and the recognition for what we do well, and then improve on the other areas. That will not be the case. So we acknowledge that it might be difficult for some companies, but we believe it's very beneficial to kind of like the brand equity and the trust that the general public can have then in the B Corp community and the B Corp stand, so to say, that all companies will have to fulfill a set of minimum requirements. Of course, the new standards will not be perfect. Nothing really is. The past standards were not. Even the new standards, with all of the rounds of consultation, might not capture everything, and there will be some imperfection. But that's why it's important to keep providing feedback, to really engage. This is one core value of the B Corp community. We've spotted, for instance, that there are a couple like themes or specific questions. There are specific questions of the current B Corp assessment that we're very happy to see kind of like going away because they were not necessarily very, very meaningful. But there are a couple questions, for instance, around like charitable donations or percentage of training participation that, as it stands in the current standards, we're not sure will be exactly captured. But what we see is that the new standards really aim to focus on kind of like material topics against which a company should have minimum performance. Another thing that we think is a really, really good development that we're very happy to see is that from what we've seen on the website, the mini site that B Lab has released with the last version of the draft standards, that we expect that there will be a whole lot more detailed information as to the evidence guidance, implementation, guidance, also links to resources, equivalencies to current frameworks and concepts in other standards, in regulations, etc. Which will mean as well that as for us consultants, we will be focusing on doing what we do best and what we enjoy most, that is to actually help companies implement this kind of advice in practice, rather than just trying to like source information and evidence guidance from the past. A lot of this information will be made a whole lot more transparent and accessible to all, which we think is a really, really good development. As I said, these standards will be focusing on a number of topics that are very material and in which businesses should be doing something, such as human rights or climate action. And in itself, the new standards will have also a whole lot of value way beyond the companies that seek certification. So we really hope that it will also constitute a good standards for all companies to just kind of like understand where they stand and see, have a little bit of a North Star to aim for as to what it means to be a business as a force for good. We also, I mean, the link with materiality, also conducting a materiality assessment, something where like you can at the same time on the impact front use the core topics of the new standards to see which areas in which all businesses have impact and should act. But also conducting a materiality assessment will be very helpful to fulfill the requirements of the new standards, as a number of requirements actually will be looking at companies addressing some of their most material impacts, be it in kind of like having human rights issues or across the whole scope of environmental impacts. Last but not least, and this is maybe a bit more of an opinion or wishful thinking, but we really think that now that there will be almost a bit more of a balance in terms of performance and that all companies will meet a number of requirements, impact business models will really become a differentiator of performance and really differentiating the companies that really go above and beyond, and instead of like, you know, doing things well or like doing things better, like it would be also doing better things. So actually implementing at the core of your business model, what kind of services or products do you put out in this world, that being impactful and rewarded in B Corp. And we really welcome that, as it will hopefully kind of like foster like good innovation, and also encouraging businesses really question the in depth what they do and the products and services that they bring about in this world, and try and question that and make that more impactful as well by design. Last slide, we're almost there and actually quite on time. And maybe what some of you are most importantly here for is, okay, with all of these changes coming about, where do we stand? What is next? And what does that mean for me as my business, in my business, and how to prepare? So currently, as it stands from B Lab's latest communications, this will not impact any company in 2025. So if your submission date is in 2025, you will still be recertifying on the current standards, meaning that if you are on a B Corp journey and are confident, are not certified yet, but are confident that you will be able to submit sometime next year, this is good. You still have time to work on the current standards. Likewise, if you are already certified as a B Corp, you can go in your B Impact assessment somewhere on the dashboard. You will be able to see not only your certification due date, but also your certification submission due date, which shall be 6 months before. And as long as your certification submission date is in 2025, you will be able to recertify on the current standards. There is then a lot more uncertainty as to what does that mean for companies afterwards from the 1st of January 2026. It is still possible that there are additional delays. B Lab has also expressed that a small batch of company might be eligible to engage with the new standards a little bit earlier in 2025. However, we haven't had any more information about that, and we are keeping ourselves very much updated. But with that in mind, and if you have been already working on a certification journey, you probably know that submission comes around always faster than we think. So it's never too early to start actually familiarizing yourself with the new standards. So the standards, the draft standards as they were published in January this year, are still available on the website published by B Lab. So you can read these in a great level of detail, actually read and tailor it depending on your own company size, see which requirements will apply to you. And see also all of the kind of like evidence guidance, implementation guidance, etc., provided by B Lab. Just a flag here is make sure to read those in combination with the second consultation report, because the website has not been updated with the outcomes of the second consultation. So for instance, on the website, you will still see fair wages and work culture as two different impact topics, while in fact they will be merged together. So if you spend any time deep diving into the standards, make sure that you look at both of these documents. Obviously, keep yourself updated. So sign up to B Lab's channel, be it the newsletter or be it on their LinkedIn page, be it B Lab UK, B Lab Europe, B Lab Global, B Lab US, whichever you prefer. And or actually on to Green's Heart channel, as we're, as always, dedicated to digested a lot of information for you and making it accessible and understandable. Yeah. Follow us on LinkedIn, sign up to the newsletter, all of these sort of channels. It is also actually a good time to start conducting a little bit of a gap analysis. And it's not just me who says it. We were at Louder Than Words earlier this year in Oxford, and the director of standards, Judy Rodriguez, I think, said it on stage herself, that now is the time for businesses to start understanding how they perform against these draft standards. Of course, maybe not to the granular detail of exact documentation and evidence guidance, but really understanding a little bit how you perform against those. And especially if it is the case that you're performing really, really well in one area in the current assessment, and maybe have a few gaps already in some other areas. So have a look, understand a little bit where you stand, so you can get the ball rolling. So for instance, human rights as a topic was not really present in the current standards. It might be that for some companies, they will already have very robust practices in place that will be therefore rewarded. It will be more a matter of kind of like adjusting to meet the evidence guidance. However, for some companies, we expect that it will be a bit more of a new topic, and especially implementing a robust due diligence process is not something that will be either like fast or straightforward. So it's really not too early to start kind of like getting the ball rolling in some areas. So again, last message is really dive into it rather sooner than later. Not that I would recommend to everyone to take this as a reading for the winter holiday. But I certainly, actually, that's what I would suggest. It's a long reading. It takes some time, but it's quite interesting. Take the time to deep dive, and surround yourself, engage in the conversation. If you're already a certified B Corp, engage on these topics as well on the Beehive. And also, yeah, bit of a warning, as with many things, B Corp standards, it can get a little bit overwhelming at times. So surround yourself with good company. And well, I was told, actually, we shouldn't do just a soft and subtle, humble plug, but actually be a bit more proud of ourselves. We've actually started already helping companies assessing their how they perform against the draft standards and conducting a few gap analysis. So if you feel that you need some help, please do get in touch. We are here and really, really love to navigate those kind of challenges with you. I think that's it for the presentation part, and we will be moving on to the Q&A time.
We've had some questions been coming throughout, but do feel free to submit some more to the Q&A section. And if we don't get to them during this part of the webinar, then we'll, as Daisy said, try and get back to you by email individually. So just having a look at the ones popping up in the Q&A section, there's a couple about kind of dates and which standard to be certifying against. Ajita has said, we certified last year and were told that we would be verified against the current standard in 2026. Is that still the case?
It depends on when your certification submission date is. So for instance, if you submit in 2025, and your certification leads into 2026, so it could be that you submit up to the 31st of December 2025, are verified in 26, still under the current standards. Where the question mark is, and it's likely that from January 2026 onwards, companies will need to submit on the new standards. I hope that's clear, and if not, happy to follow up.
Great. And Andy has another question sort of about timings as well, which is they have their third year recertification in November 2025. When will they need to recertify after that for the new standards? And I think Andy's question is essentially, how long will they be certified for? Will they have to recertify after a year in 2026, or will they have another 3 years?
We'll have another 3 years. So companies will then be moving to the new standards along with their own recertification cycle.
Okay, moving on from some timing questions now. Jessica has a really good question on, is it likely that a B Corp will need to meet a specific number of standards and improve at their next verification? And will we be told how many we need to meet/exceed?
Did you want to take that one, or shall I go? So the expectation on companies is to meet the standards. There is no expectation to exceed the standards. So that's the first thing. However, a number of requirements, and that's getting into the granular details a bit here, but some requirements will be, so there are some requirements for companies to meet at certification, and there will be a number of requirements to meet at recertification. So this means that effectively, even a company recertifying today will have their first certification on the new standards in 3 years, and then recertification in 6 years' time. Some of these requirements to meet at recertification include improving on some of the targets that you have set. So for instance, if you have a climate action strategy, or if you have kind of like any other improvement strategy, you might be required in your first certification to set some goal, and across and by your next recertification to then meet some targets, or at least report transparently against your performance against those targets.
Yeah, that's I'm sure that's really helpful, and that kind of segues into another question about kind of meeting and exceeding sub-requirements. Someone has asked, what are the benefits of exceeding sub-requirements if there are no points, other than obviously the ethical benefits?
I would say to that one that it's the benefits to your business. So you may see benefits to the business from exceeding the targets, because there'll be, additional social value and additional environmental value, or even additional financial value that you'll see out as an outcome from exceeding some of the requirements, because, you know, through exceeding the requirements, you'll be making your business more resilient to, for example, climate impacts or other risks that might be impacting your business. So yeah, I would just look at the exceeding the requirements as being an opportunity to see, you know, where can we push ourselves, where can we maybe find additional opportunities within the targets to improve the business, whether it's for our employees, for our suppliers, for our community, for our customers. There'll be a lot of opportunities to go after. And of course, for sustainability, it's all about continuous improvement. You know, once we've met the requirements, we're not going to stop there. We're going to continue with the ambition and try and look ahead to what's next. How can we improve further? So yeah, I would just encourage you to look at it with that mindset of what are the opportunities and how can we go after them.
Yeah, and I would say that's a similar mindset to what most B Corps are doing now with the 80-point minimum threshold. That's seen as the minimum requirements to become a B Corp, but that doesn't mean that people aren't having high sights and expectations for how they want to improve using the standards to kind of be the best and most impactful business they can be. Someone else has asked, are the standards now finalized, or how many more drafts do we think there will be?
As far as we know, always a caveat, but as far as we know, this was the last final draft, and now what will be published next is the final version of the standards, sometime early 2025, whatever that means.
Sophie has also asked a question about optionality. Daisy, this might be one for you. She'd just like you to explain to how the optionality of the requirements works, and if you're doing a gap analysis, would you recommend also looking at those optional requirements?
Yeah, definitely. That's where the tailoring comes in. So if you select the size business kind of threshold that you should be looking at, whether it's a medium-sized business, then you'll see the number of options you need to meet. So for example, in JEDI, I think it's a large company has to meet 7 out of those 23 or 26. I can't remember the exact number. So when you're doing the gap analysis, it's worth looking at, you know, are there some that we're already doing? Is there some that are particularly specific to us because of the context of our business? Or is there some that we want to go after, which are actually a bit further out of our reach, and we want to make improvements towards meeting those optional standards? Maybe you're already meeting 7 of them and you think, let's go for 10. So yeah, I would definitely factor in that optionality, and it's all explained when you're on the B Lab new standards microsite and you select the size of the business. It will say, you know, a medium-sized business is required to meet 7 of the below standards, or whatever the optionality is for your business size, and then it gives you the full list of the options you can choose from. So then you can do that kind of gap analysis against each of them and decide which ones to go after.
If I may jump in as well, another actually requirement against which there is interesting optionality is that of fair wages. So there has been a lot of back and forth and discussion and constructive debates within the community as to all B Corps should be paying fair wage. Does that mean a living wage? But also acknowledging that depending on kind of like business context and geographies and the complexity of even knowing global benchmark on living wages and availability even of living wage benchmarks, this is a little bit of a difficult requirement to ask kind of like to everyone in a very similar way. So there has actually been optionality as well as to how does a fair wage how is a fair wage implemented? Does that mean implementing a living wage? Does that mean implementing a collectively bargained wage? Or does that mean implementing a wage that is at least, I think, and I don't remember if it's 10 or 15% above, you know, legal minimum wage in the geography, et cetera, et cetera. So it's also an interesting one, for instance, where there is optionality also adapted to context.
Great, thank you both. David has asked a really interesting question. It might be slightly too detailed to get really into right now, but he's said, with the introduction of the new B Corp standards, what updated guidelines or advice will be provided regarding conducting due diligence when working with organizations throughout the value chain? Specifically, how can businesses ensure alignment with these standards when onboarding new clients? Just before I pass over to Lucy or Daisy, I would say, definitely check out the microsite to look through all of those juicy sub-requirements. That should give you a nice kind of introduction. But Daisy, Lucy, anything to add?
Yeah, I would just say the detailed guidance that is kind of sitting below each of the sub requirements is a lot more transparent on this new version of the standards than it ever has been in the past. So there should be really clear guidance on exactly how to meet each of those. Obviously, there'll be some nuance within your exact business. So once the final version is released and you can take a lot of inspiration from the draft version, there should be clear guidelines of what you should be doing to then look at that specific impact, whether it's the due diligence in the value chain or any of the other sub requirements. That guidance is going to be really, really helpful for companies. And actually, if I could just segue into the next question from Jessica about specific guidance on impact business models, is kind of the same answer. So we're expecting the impact business models to have a similar level of guidance to the for performance topics sub requirements. So also the purpose of still including the impact business models in the requirements is that they can also be kind of a North Star or a long-term goal that a company might want to implement. So you can look at the impact business models as, you know, is there a transformation that we can make within our business to have this specific impact, whether it's implementing a workforce development program where we specifically hire those with less opportunities, or, you know, a specific environmental impact business model if you could change your input material to be recycled content, for example. So yeah, the impact business models should also be seen as improvement opportunities as well. Even if you're not, you know, scoring against one of them already, they can still be seen as opportunities that you can go after maybe in the longer term, because it might require a bit more of a transformation rather than just an operational change.
I wanted to just add quickly something as well to David's question, actually, because he did flag kind of like specifically working with new clients. And so I'm just overinterpreting the question, but if what you're hinting at is everything around working with clients potentially in controversial industries, this is something, and therefore related to kind of like the risk assessment. So this is something where there is a lot more guidance in the new standards, but B Lab has also acknowledged that it's something that they are still working on. As a matter of fact, no later than last week, B Lab has published already like more extended guidance as to kind of like guiding companies that might be either operating in non-eligible or controversial industries, and companies working with clients in either non-eligible or controversial industries, and what type of work they are doing with those, and therefore what a pathway to certification might be. It's also something that is like kind of like, this is the stance, this is already impacting companies in their certification journey now. This is something that we expect B Lab to continue reworking. So the long story short is that the new standards will definitely be looking more closely at the kind of impacts of the business, not only direct in your direct operation, not only with your suppliers, but also with your clients. And that this is still evolving, but that there's a lot more guidance around it as it stands.
Yeah, and I've just posted in the chat the link to that updated webpage on the controversial industries from B Lab there. I like the fact that Alistair has already acknowledged this is a difficult question to answer, but Alistair says, what is your sense of the step up for a company who is, say, at 80 to 85 points right now to meet the new requirements? Would you say it's a natural progression or more of a giant leap?
Well, on that, it depends what your 85 point score is made of. I would say that if it is made of extremely good performance in one area, and especially a company that is going, that has an 85 score because of a impact business model that just itself scores 10 to 20 points. Indeed, it might be a bit of a leap in certain areas where you're not scoring so well just yet. So I think right now is a good time. You need to just kind of like see how you perform against the different impact areas in the B impact assessment. And also the way actually we advise most clients to work, even in the current assessment, is to strive for an 85 point score just based on operational questions. So without those impact business models, so really striving for your operations, your day-to-day operations being quite impactful and with a degree of due diligence already. So again, sorry, but it really the answer is it depends, and it's a case for you to kind of like see how you're performing already against the standards.
Thanks, Lucy. Not a very easy question to answer. I'm just having a look through the remaining Q&A questions. We don't have particularly long left before we need to wrap things up. Someone has asked, how much time do companies have before their resubmission date to start inputting their data into the B Impact Assessment portal? Their resubmission date is the 27th of December 2025, so they'd like to know whether they'll have a chance of submitting under the old standards or not.
Yeah, absolutely. You can start right now. As soon as you certify as a B Corp, your assessment is automatically effectively replicated within the B Impact Assessment portal. So you can make edits to your B Impact Assessment at any time throughout your certification term. So throughout the 3 years that you're a certified B Corp before you have to then recertify. So you're a year out now from having to recertify. So now would be a good time to start looking through updating your information. You know, what have you changed within the business? Have you implemented any new policies that you can gain credit for in the assessment? Just being mindful that just before you submit, you'll need to update some of the time-bound data, like the number of employees, and also making sure that the fiscal year is kind of the last fiscal year that has closed at the point that you submit. So for example, if your fiscal year is ending in March next year, it would be worth updating your fiscal data before you submit with the kind of most recent fiscal year data. So you can get started right now with being mindful that you might need to update some of the numbers closer to the time.
Thanks, Daisy. I think that is all we have time for. There's a couple of unanswered questions in the Q&A, but as we said before, we will do our best to get back to you individually on those. I'll just hand over to Lucy to wrap up.
Well, that was all really. I hope you found this session helpful. Please do feel free to get in touch either if you have questions that we haven't answered, or if you have any kind of like feedback to provide to us, if you have any thoughts and wishes on what you think we should address at Greenheart, what next webinar you would like to see us put together. Thank you so much for joining. Thank you to my brilliant colleagues, Danielle behind the scene, Daisy for your presentation, and Molly for your excellent moderation. Have an excellent rest of your day and end of the year, everyone.